Hello.
Hello, hello.
Sorry to break the silence. Someone had to do it.
Happy Tuesday, everyone. Give folks another minute or two to join. Link to the notes is in the chat now. Jeff, will you be speaking for the Securing Critical Projects working group today?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And I'm imagining we will see Amir or Michael Scavetta for the threats working group. So, unless somebody else on the call is here to represent them. So Jeff, would you be actually up for swapping order here if we don't have Amir or Michael?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we'll give it another minute. All right, and then for TAC members, we have myself, Dan, Probe, Josh. So that is 4. I know we will not have Ava or Abhishek today. So we're just missing Luke.
Okay.
All right. Let me turn off. All right, we will go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to the March 21st TAC call. Before we jump into the agenda, I did want to remind the broader community that we started the election process for both the TAC as well as the Security Community Individual Representative. That started yesterday and will end at the midnight, 11:59 Eastern Time on April 2nd. So the next meeting of the TAC, well, we should have at least the election results available ahead of that meeting. I see Luke has joined now, so we have 5 TAC members present, and that represents quorum. First on the agenda, we will hand it over to Jeff Mendoza, who's going to give us a brief update from the Securing Critical Projects Working Group. So Jeff, over to you.
Thanks, Bob. Let me select the right window to share. I think this is the right one. Can you see my screen?
Yep, just fine.
Okay. Yeah, so just wanted to do a quick update. I didn't have like slides prepared or anything. But here is our working group page on GitHub and our current projects. The main project I want to give an update on is kind of the main project of our working group, which is the list of critical projects. This is discussed in more detail here. So the main thing that we've been working on is actually 2 things in parallel. The list that we put out about a year ago, we're retroactively calling, version 1. So we have a a new process that's under development for something that we would call version 2, which is pulling in suggestions from a broader set of people, engaging communities outside the OpenSSF to suggest which projects are critical, and then collecting that data and automatically pulling in metrics on all that data. So what is the criticality score? What is the download count? What is the census data on that? So that's been going on the side. And what we've decided in the meantime is we need to make an updated list from our version 1 list. So that's actually what we've been doing. You can see our kind of tracking table here. That's what we've been doing for most of this year, is getting an updated version of our using the old style, while in parallel working on that new style collection of data. So right now we're in between our two voting and discussion meetings. So this is kind of a call for participation. If you want to weigh in on the proposed projects, and if you think they're critical or not, jump into our meeting. We have another one coming up on Thursday of this week. And just to give you a preview of kind of the active work that we're doing here. This is a spreadsheet where we have, our old list here on version 1, and then our candidates here. And we've been going through in our meetings and deciding what is and isn't critical and what's going to go onto the version 1.1 list. So yeah, go ahead and join us if you'd like. As far as the other projects right now under our working group, no major announcements there. They've been doing development and releases, and things have been going well. And then another thing that's kind of happening right now is we have a new proposal for a project to join the working group, the 10K critical list, which is different than our current list is around 100 or 100 to 200. So looks logical, but interested to see the discussion later in this meeting about the project governance model that affects this. Make sure we're doing things the right way. So yeah, feel free to weigh in on this as well. That's about it. Any questions on the working group or the set of critical projects or any of the other projects going on?
I had one quick question. Looking across the room, I don't see any hands, so I'll just jump the queue. If you were to move forward with the AO list, would you envision maintaining both your top 100 spreadsheet and this, or would they become unified and simply the top 100 is the top 100 of a unified list?
I think they would be separate projects. And one thing to call out here, I mean, this is, we're updating the name of this this is our version 1. We're updating the name of this to set, because we're not really ranking these projects. So I think we just will have 2 separate tiers, a tier of projects that come into this list or set, and then a second tier. So those are going to have different, goals and design problems and, different scope. I see, Dan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just, sorry for the possibly dumb question, but what happens after the list? How, where does the list go right now? You mentioned Alpha and Omega. Are they the group that you're feeding into, or is this being kind of like,
No,
how are resources being marshaled to fix the problems that you're finding?
Somebody asked to repeat the question. The question is, what do we do with the list? And the short answer is that's outside the scope of the working group. But the longer answer is, yeah, it's picked up by anybody who wants to engage, like needs to know, like, what are the top projects I want to engage. So yes, Alpha Omega is a major consumer
allow this
but
to
I believe there are others. We did the great MFA
Yeah,
project.
I think that's a definite
years ago.
icebreaker
getting
because
some-
I mentioned it to him, you know.
Some noise. Yeah, there. Thanks. Yeah, we did the great MFA, or not we, but you know, this list fed into the great MFA project a couple of years ago. So there are other consumers of the list, but the main point inside our working group is to just get the list and publish it here in our project and then in our page here.
Thanks for the clarification. I just wanted to make,
Yeah, no
that was
worries.
my understanding. I just wanted to make sure that was correct. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions for Jeff? I guess last one, Jeff, anything that the TAC can help the working group with at the moment?
I don't think so. I think the main thing is I do want to make sure that you know, when we get project proposals that we are following the right process. So yeah, would happy to see communication on that flow out. I don't see a lot of like emails and when we have like changes in procedures or new procedures where there wasn't one on the working group chair list. So maybe some more emails there would be great.
Okay, and then I see one final question from Tracy in the chat. How do folks propose projects for this?
Great question. Yeah, so on the current list, we're pretty much taking, when we published list 1.0, we got a bunch of feedback in different ways and we weren't really ready for all that feedback, or like we didn't have a official way for people to provide it. So for the current list, we're essentially just taking all that feedback that we got on the various methods from the first list and considering those projects. Before we publish this list, we're going to have a more official way for people to propose projects to go into the next version of the list, 1.3. So we haven't, as a working group, we haven't figured out how we want that. If we want GitHub issues, if we want a doc or a Google form or something like that. And again, that's on our version 1 of the list. Version 2 of the list, the whole point of that is to have this more automated as far as both proposals and kind of giving thumbs up and things like that. Cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jeff. Appreciate the update.
Thanks, and I'll type it in on the agenda, kind of my summary.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Quick look over the participants. I don't see any representatives of the Identifying Security Threats Working Group. Please correct me if I'm wrong there. Otherwise, we'll have to defer that update to a later meeting. Once, twice, sold. All right, then we'll go ahead and continue on. The next item on the agenda is a procedural vote. So I guess for mainly targeted attack members, hopefully you recall that at the last governing board meeting, I believe it was the last one, might have been 2 ago, the governing board approved the creation of what's called the governance subcommittee, which is aimed to provide high bandwidth communication between the governing board, the TAC, and foundation staff as we work through building out business processes, looking at proposals for funding, and trying to make sure that we have the correct and effective dialogue at the various meetings. So as part of that creation of the committee, there was a request to create a new GitHub repo and to file issues against that repo for basically tasks for that subcommittee to ultimately work through. In previous TAC meetings, we have discussed issues or PRs 131, 132, and 133, which represent the CERT proposal, the EDU SIG proposal, as well as the funding for the OSS security mailing list infrastructure. I believe the discussion on that essentially has been sent up to the GB, but from a procedural point of view, I wanted to call for any final comments before we open those issues at that committee for discussion later this week. So we've already started talking about them. This is a bit of kind of doing process in reverse, but again, in the interest of just full disclosure, wanted to raise this as a topic. And rather than call for a vote, I guess I'll just ask if there are any objections to proceeding with those dialogues at the GB level. See thumbs up, no objections. Any questions from any present on this?
No objections here.
Great. All right, then we'll consider that a vote of approval. All right, so then I guess the more meaty topic for today's discussion is kind of revisiting the last, some of the dialogue at the last TAC meeting. I know this has come up in a couple different conversations, even in Jeff's dialogue this morning, around the current state of project governance at the OpenSSF. Those of you who are new to the call may not be aware, but the TAC launched a multi-month effort starting about this point last year to ultimately build up and ratify a project lifecycle process, which can be seen in the TAC repo. That was a discussion back and forth amongst a number of different dimensions. Some of those were around just, hey, we need minimally viable process and let's get something written down that can help kind of guide the foundation from an operational point of view. Some of that was a more strategic conversation around, where did we see the foundation ultimately being? Did we want to take a larger foundation and maybe, to use the adage, let's plant 1,000 flowers and see what blooms? Other terms that have been used in parallels are, do we want a big tent? Do we want a very small number of projects? How do we want to relate the brand of the foundation to the projects that exist within the foundation? And so there's a lot of active dialogue that occurred last year on this front. We eventually did call for a vote and did merge PR 112, which established a governance process for us. But in the closing months of last year, we didn't have a ton of projects that applied to join the OpenSSF. So we haven't had a whole lot of opportunity to test out that mechanism, understand where it's strong, maybe where it needs some tweaks. But at last week's TAC meeting, we did bring a proposal forward for the RS Tough project that was being sponsored by the Supplying Software Repositories Working Group. And I'll just say from my own personal opinion, some of the feedback from my fellow TAC members on that discussion I found a little bit puzzling. I think there was a general sentiment of, why is this at the TAC meeting? Is this just being presented for awareness, or do we actually have to vote on the inclusion of a new project into the foundation? There was a discussion around how much of this is actually delegated down to the working group level versus, is it simply the sponsoring body, which can either be a working group or the TAC itself, because we do have the concept of a top level project in the governance that was voted on and merged. So in some sense, I guess I wanted to share that was my reaction in some of the informal conversation during the meeting as well as after the meeting. It does appear that there is a bit of I guess, difference of opinion, maybe is the nicest way to put it, around kind of where do we sit. I would remind folks that, again, where we sit is the document that is published in GitHub under the TAC repo. And if we want to make changes as a body, we can certainly pursue those dialogues. But in general, part of our role of a foundation is not operating by the whims of opinion. Frankly, it's to operate by documented processes that any working group lead or any community member or potential community member can inspect, understand, and ultimately follow. And so it's really important that we as a TAC, in my view, execute against the published processes and make changes if we feel like they are not serving the interests of the foundation. I think that's the best way to operate from a position of transparency, from a position of fairness, and from a position of just efficiency. If we're all working off of the same source of truth, it's a lot easier to operate than having to have a multitude of conversations to figure out what is kind of the norm within the organization. Pointing that to a written document is certainly the way to go. And I think is the established standard from this. Josh, I see your hand up. Or was that not a hand up? Josh? Were you just waving at me? All right, we'll keep going. So I think the conversation that kind of ended at last week's TAC meeting was a dialogue that David Wheeler opened a a pull request on, which was, did we want to make changes to the process? Do we want to make process changes at this point around the project governance model? I think it's a discussion that we can have certainly today. I will say, though, that we will not be holding a vote today on any changes that exist that would be proposed to the model. In the charter, we're required to have at least a 7-day window for those changes to exist and be publicly read. And ultimately, we need to be just cognizant of the fact that we are in the middle of an election cycle, and the next time this meeting, this body is adjourned, we may have different members. Actually, we will have different members because we don't have everyone running for re-election. So I guess the TLDR is, let's have a discussion today around the nuance and some of the guidance here, but I want to preface this whole dialogue with the output of this conversation may be additional PRs, or it may be additional issues. We should not take any marching orders from the discussion today. We need to operate off of GitHub as the source of truth. And we also don't want to be changing process right as we hand over an organization. So I think where I want to frame today's dialogue is around the nuance of, what do we have today? Do we feel like it's working? Do we feel like it's not working? Do we feel like we have enough data to judge whether it's working or not, rather than litigate specific proposals to, hey, let's go make a tweak here. Let's keep it a little bit more, a little bit higher level than that. So with that, I guess I will open the floor to any TAC members or folks that have questions. And Josh, I know I said, you said in the chat that I just answered your question, but I wanted to give you, if you wanted any clarifying comments there, let me know. All right, Justin, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing whether or not the TAC should make a decision about the inclusion of a, new project or work group, because today the only thing that confers is, you get a place in the organization, in the Slack repo, sorry, Slack and the repos and all that. Doesn't imply any real organizational support. I think if we want to make the decisions of the TAC have value, there's got to be money on the other side of it. Like, we need to get to a world where the governing board says, TAC, here's X dollars to spend per year. This is your budget. Go figure out how to make this work across all of your working groups so that they are successful. Because otherwise, we're just sort of a loose confederation of committees that happen to exist that are entirely driven ground up. There's no direction that the TAC can provide if there's no funding or other resources to direct, because every member is going to direct their own energy in the way they see fit. There's nothing this committee can do about it short of spending money. And so I think as we think about governance in the future, if there's no money attached, we should just assume that this committee will be advisory only and not have any direction setting.
Oh, thanks for that, Justin. Jock, you're next on my list, so please go ahead.
No, David got up before me.
Gotta love Zoom ordering. All right, David, sorry.
Well, no, I mean, I'll agree with Justin that money is, where the actual control is, but I also politely say that that's not what the tax job is, that the governing board specifically set up that they control the funds, that's the funding organizations, and that they have the ultimate say, and they should not give the TAC a free hand or a blank check, that it is the responsibility of the TAC to make recommendations and to perform the technical advice, which is, that's in the name, of what the governing board should do and recommend to the governing board, we should fund this, but it shouldn't be the tax having its own budget to give out to working groups.
Jock.
Yeah, so a difficulty, I think I would reframe it as the availability of people to work on things. So at the moment, as Justin pointed out, we have a lot of grassroots activity. Folks turn up, they volunteer time, which is sort of sliced out of their day jobs, or hopefully their day jobs. But we face a lot of problems that we know about that require full-time attention that volunteers can't do. And so there's this big sort of like, there's a local minima where we're doing it on a volunteer basis, and there's another maxima where it's been done full time, and a giant hump, a giant sort of void in the middle called the governing board, where it's not clear what they're doing. So, the governing board, I'm fine with the governing board having sort of dollar authority, but I don't know what they're doing. Like I've, to my knowledge, never been in a working group where somebody said, "Hi, I'm here from the governing board and I'm here to help." Right? Like that just hasn't happened. There hasn't been sort of a connective tissue between the dollars and the volunteers. That concerns me more. Like I'm fine with the existing arrangements as long as they were sort of like massaged to make that connection more explicit and more active. Because everything I hear about the governing board, I hear by way of rumor or third hand by the grapevine, and I'll usually be surprised because it's all news to me. So that concerns me.
So I'm next in the queue. I guess the couple of responses I wanted to make to that, and I do recognize we have other hands up as well. First, to your last point, Jock, around transparency to the governing board, I would we can certainly put the link to this in the minutes. The governing board meeting minutes are publicly posted. So if you are curious in terms of what happens at those meetings, we certainly can make sure that folks have ready access to that. That was a change that we discussed at the governing board and then implemented. Brian can keep me honest, roughly the second half of last year, I believe. Don't hold me to the exact date, but that's what my memory gives me. So in terms of outputs of that to be able to independently introspect, that is available. To Justin's point around money, I guess I would phrase it slightly differently, but I agree with the sentiment. I think it's a sense of what, I think even last year I talked about the notion of gives and gets, and gives not being as strong on the, hey, I want to donate a project to the foundation. It's really a roar around, what do I get by doing this? Is there marketing support? Is there operational support? Is it cloud hosting and money? Is it added, calls to the member companies of the foundation to say, hey, we have a new project and we're looking for volunteers, or we're looking for contributors in these specific areas, things that the foundation staff can ultimately do to help bring resources to bear. Some of those may be financial in nature, but some of it may be more of an orchestration or supporting role to help make sure that those projects are successful as they can be. I wouldn't limit it simply to just money. Money is obviously an important dynamic in the context of resources, but honestly, to some of the other comments, contributors are often more valuable than necessarily just pure cash that can be thrown at things. So with that, I believe, Krob, your hand was up next. Apologies if that's not the case.
Yes, thank you. As a member of the community and a leader of some of the working groups, I have had the great opportunity to live through the current process. And there are some gaps I think we need to better refine. I think we're missing some type of incubation, pre-sandbox stage that allows for work of the community to come to a working group to get that additional collaboration and resources, as long as it's aligned with our mission and vision, and kind of kicking the tires and experimenting prior to a full-on commitment of anything, whether it's cloud hosting, it's somebody to help with minutes, it's money for whatever. And then I think we also need to define, there appears to be a weighted value on software over other forms of contribution. And that needs to be, I think, laid out as to what the decisioning criteria are. Why are some things required to go through a formal process, and why are others exempt from that, even though they potentially have at the end of the day the same, if not greater value, depending. So those are my 2 points. I'd love to get those ironed out so we can move together positively.
Thanks, Fro. David Wheeler, I believe, is next.
Unmute myself first. Two hopefully just a few real quick points, I hope. Clearly, yes, money can be very, very helpful for projects and SIGs. I don't think Wei is arguing against that, but I think there is a perceived value, and I guess I'm Bob, I'm kind of emphasizing a point you made earlier. Simply being part of the OpenSSF does have perceived value for a lot of folks. People are trying to start projects and SIGs and join because if nothing else, it gets that visibility, increases the odds of collaboration, and so on. As far as the lack of visibility of governing board decisions, I think that's a fair concern. I'm not entirely sure how to fix that, but that sounds like something that would be of value. As I'll take that somewhere and try to see if we can't. Obviously, governing board decisions that involve things like personnel and stuff, there's some sensitivities. But that said, I think that we can certainly do more to make more information available. So that sounds like a good thing to work on.
Tracy.
Hi, folks. I'm from the governing board and I'm here to help. So Shaq, just getting started on that from last month, but I would love to be a bridge to try and help with some of these things. To the project things and Justin's point, I did want to highlight, like, there are various services that OpenSSF can offer projects at the moment. So I'd love to maybe help raise awareness of those. Like with Sigstore, we've used things like press services, having logos, swag in the shop, even a landing page on OpenSSF. So I think what would be helpful maybe is trying to formalize those services, and to Krob's point, if we can tier projects or understand the varying levels of importance of top level versus incubating versus working group ones, then happy to help kind of direct people to what's available, and where possible unlock future funding or support as projects needed.
Thanks, Tracy. Arno?
Hi, sorry, I lowered my hand instead of unmuting. A few things I wanted to bring up. First, we have a sandbox stage, and there are some requirements attached to that, but we have sandbox before incubation. It has a certain set of criteria for entry in sandbox, but it's there. We could decide to revise those criteria if we feel like they are not meeting the needs, but I just want to point that out. I also wanted to point out that as part of the project lifecycle, we define for each stage a set of benefits. And that was one thing we actually specifically worked on, is, we wanted to give some kind of motivation for projects to try to graduate from one stage to the next. And the idea is, well, the bigger you are, the more advanced you are in your project life cycle, the more resources you get. I don't think we have implemented any of this today. And I was a bit disappointed to see some of the reactions from the first request we got that actually has been going through the process as defined, as Bob said. For me, I thought, wow, this is interesting. We approved this process not quite a year ago, but many months, over 6 months ago. And this is the first time we have an opportunity to experience it. And I wish we could actually get through this and maybe, go back to some of the other projects and try to get them through AdBet in a faster way to expedite it, to see where things are. One thing I wanted to point out is, I think we should not lose sight of the fact that one of the goals of the process we designed was to also provide us with a central repository for the list of things that are going on in the organization. You know, we keep hearing this for any newcomers into OpenSSF. They always say, invariably, I don't know what's going on. Where is the list of all the working groups, all the projects, the SIGs and the activities? And so the project life cycle, the way it is designed in the documentation, actually provides for a way to basically maintain this list at all times. And so if we were to decide that the control, the approval should be changed, I wish we could do that without losing that, you know, mechanism. So practically speaking, we might still want people to have a pull request against the TAC repo for that purpose, and then say, hey, but the TAC doesn't actually need to approve it in a formal way in a meeting. If it's already been approved by a working group, we can just, you know, have it done through a GitHub. But I just want us not to kind of throw the baby with the bathwater, so to speak. And, you know, because I think there's a lot that we built into these mechanisms that we have documented that we haven't even started using, which I think has value. Thank you.
No, thanks, Arnaud. Chuck.
Me again. So I can sort of tie together two points or two different threads here then. One was Kerb's point that we overweight software, or we over sense software compared to other things. So like something like the idea of a sandbox and a graduation and this whole process makes really good sense for a software product that has a long life and different levels of maturity and integration with the OpenSSF. Makes less sense for something like we want to support a mailing list or we want to support a shared help desk. But those are exactly the sorts of things where at least, you know, hecto-kilobucks or megabucks are required in order to give it full-time staff and full-time capability. And that feels to me like a gap. It's been a while since I read that documentation, I will confess. So maybe it's all covered in there, but you know, the process of obtaining funding is a little opaque at the moment. And that goes back to my complaint that I haven't felt like I've had much visibility into governing board or much communication from the governing board. I didn't know that Tracy was a governing board member, for example. That was news to me. But yeah, to summarize those two things, I think one, the whole concept of like a project that graduates is very software centric. And two, there are still things that need money that aren't projects, they're programs, right? They're ongoing processes.
No, thanks, Chuck. I think I'll try to respond to a few of the comments along the way. To your question around the funding vehicles, again, the TAC does not have, as today, does not have fiscal authority over budget. The governing board has tried to take a pragmatic view of saying, hey, if we're asking for $100, let's be cognizant of relative to the budget. That's not a lot of money. Let's, you know, try to move expeditiously and make those things be as streamlined as possible. If we're asking for $100 million, obviously it's a very different story in terms of awareness, buy-in, you know, clarity, things like that. But the process, you know, and certainly we can take this as an action to go back and see if we can improve or establish documentation around that, is the governing board wants the TAC to pass on a recommendation for, we have reviewed the request and we view it to be beneficial, timely, and a good use of funds. Those funds may exist or they may not yet sit in the account coffers of the OpenSSF. There may have to be recruiting and pledging and work that the foundation goes and does in order to raise, you know, such a sum of money. But they are looking to the TAC to provide a filtering mechanism and an opinion around whether we think that is good or bad. So even the three issues I mentioned earlier around, you know, EDU, SIG, the CERT proposal, as well as the mailing list proposal, all of those come with associated price tags in terms of either hiring people or asking for resources. The help desk proposal, another one, right, that we've talked about in the past. So in that view, the governing board and the TAC have essentially said, we want to make sure that the TAC is in the loop and is aware of what we are spending significant sums of money on, if they are in support of technical initiatives, projects, working groups, et cetera. And two, that the TAC has a chance to formally evaluate and weigh in whether or not, like, yeah, it doesn't seem like it would hurt, sure, go do it if all things are equal, to no, we don't see it as a priority, or yes, this is the most important thing, we should cause a reprioritization discussion because we think this is timely and urgent. They're looking for that sort of feedback from the TAC as we evaluate things. So while we don't necessarily control budget and hand out money to individual projects or working groups, they are looking to us to provide an opinion to help guide their decision-making process today. So in terms of that overall flow, bring the proposal to the TAC will evaluate it, we'll take a vote. We will then forward that on to this governance committee that I mentioned earlier in this call. That is really meant to be the, let's crystallize the ask, let's make sure that all of the obvious questions are ready to go, and tee it up for an appropriate dialogue at the governing board. That's the current operating model that we have. Well, of course, operating models can be changed or tweaked if we find them to be frustrating or too bureaucratic or too low bandwidth. But at the moment, that's the process that we have established. Dan, go ahead.
Thanks. Kind of circling back to the original topic of project acceptance and governance process and all of that stuff. I don't think anybody is saying skip the process. I think a lot of reasonable people, everyone here is a reasonable person, can read that process and interpret it a whole bunch of different ways. I was equally as confused when I thought last week when other TAC members thought that we did need to vote to accept things inside of working groups. That's not my interpretation of what the policy says. And based on the activities of the last 6 months and no one raising any questions, I think like we've seen working groups acting in that way, and projects. In the last 6 months, the Microsoft SC2CF project was accepted by the supply chain integrity working group. There was no TAC vote there. The SigStore project has just accepted 2 or 3 donations as well, with just SigStore TSC votes, with nothing coming to the OpenSSF. There are quite a few examples of this where working groups kind of assumed that that was the intention and that this TAC process was really only for top level things. Last week was the first time that I thought that it had come up, and I think a lot of TAC members thought that that was just an FYI, myself included. So it's kind of confusing at the end of that meeting when we rushed the vote. I don't think it's a people skipping the process thing. I think it's just that was the way the process was written. That was the way I understood it at the time, and people have been operating that way with no complaints. So I think that's sort of where I sit and where my interpretation of everything, and based on what's been going on, that seems to be the broader interpretation too.
Tim.
Maybe to echo some of that, this is a constructive and normal place to be. As a project grows, its documented processes get operationalized more. And as we work more things through the process, we start to discover where there's a need for clarity. So I think it's great that we're having this conversation. I feel like one of the aspects of this, and it's easy to infer too much into what's written just in GitHub versus a conversation, but some of the comments around, well, we need to do what's in the document. Of course, we need to do that, but we shouldn't be governed solely by the document as it was in the past. What was sufficient before might not be for the future. So we do need leadership. And I think TAC is a great place for that to center, because it has visibility across the broader organization. So to have TAC leading on discussions like this, or the issue that was open, to say, hey, what is our next level of iteration? We started a certain process like a year ago, it's been operating, what's the next level iteration? It's great to have leadership on that. So I want to make sure that we build momentum and that it actually turns into PRs, that we do add some refinements. And of course, that needs to go through its own process. It can't just be arbitrary and quick, but there also isn't a rush. Like if we iteratively improve a bit over the year, that's fantastic.
Thanks, Tim. And I would echo the sentiment of your comments as well. I think, again, this is, iteration is critical. And so certainly, you know, I'm not trying to position.
Meeting is being recorded.
Yeah, sorry about that. My Zoom drops every 20 minutes. Do we have sufficient data to warrant, hey, we've been operating for several months. Does the TAC feel like we have you know, desire to make some tweaks in one direction or not? So that's really the point of the dialogue today. Kurt, go ahead.
I also think a more clear bar on what the threshold is that needs to be elevated up from a working group to the TAC. If there are things we wish to empower the working groups to manage on themselves with their TAC liaisons, or does everything need to be run by the TAC? It'd be nice to have that bug bar kind of documented. I have spoken.
To add to this, I mean, we don't really have some kind of definition of how decisions are made, for that matter, right? I mean, it's fairly common in organization to say, oh, we make decision by consensus, and there you have to kind of define what that means. But, you know, because different organizations have different ways. W3C has a very extreme view on what consensus means. You know, it doesn't have to be that extreme, but, you know, it has its value, but it takes time. But, you know, is it simple majority? Is that enough to create a new activity or what? I mean, this is the kind of situations we're facing now where we haven't defined it beforehand. So we start having votes, it becomes controversial, and you don't even know, okay, what kind of vote are we having? What's the rule? How are we going to decide? It's a bit embarrassing to try to figure that out after the fact.
Jeff.
I just wanted to share that I've been participating on the governance committee that was established to sort of act as I don't want to call it a safety net, but just a place to catch some of these gaps in the way the organization works as it grows. And it's certainly grown tremendously over the last 12 months. And so I just offering assistance as a newly elected chair of the governance committee. If the TAC wants some assistance from that committee to just kind of work on some of these issues, we'd be happy to try and assist with that.
I appreciate the offer, and I think that is the spirit of that subcommittee as well. Is I think there's, you know, the conclusion, if you go back and look at the annual report from last year, is there's a lot of great work going on within the projects and working groups. I think the role of the TAC going forward into next year, and, you know, look forward to seeing the results of the election. But I think my personal feedback would be, you know, I think the TAC's opportunity here is to serve as that, you know, establish and maintain process that ultimately serves the interest of the groups. That, again, to even Justin and David's points around making sure that they are reasonably, you know, as reasonably as they can be resourced from a financial or personnel perspective, whatever the definition of resource is for that context. And also, just to be clear on mission and vision, right? I think the other thing that the governing board has spent a ton of time talking about over the last 9 months is the identity of the foundation. You know, again, there's lots of great work going on, but crystallizing that down to, you know, an opinionated organization that's focused on efficacy of outcomes and making sure that we are being as beneficial as possible to other foundations, individual contributors to projects, and individual maintainers, and everything on that spectrum in between, from the largest of projects to the smallest. You know, are we catalyzing the right outcomes to help move along the industry in this space? And so some of that is through software, some of that is through education, some of that is through establishing new things. We have a lot. This is a very daunting space, and there's a lot of problems that are going on right now, but ultimately our opportunity is to rise to that. So I think, you know, iterating on this again in the spirit of continuous improvement is, I think, where we need to be focused as a group. Want to be cognizant of we have 10 minutes left in today's call. So any kind of final discussion points before we kind of try to move this to a set of action items for further discussion?
I just wanted to say I've been trying to keep running notes on the discussion, but if anyone feels I've been misrepresented, please correct it.
Thanks, Chuck. Appreciate you doing that. All right, so I guess it would make a call for topics that we would like to either pursue in GitHub issues or in topics for future governing or future TAC meetings, rather. So I heard a point raised around, or so Brian, go ahead. Sorry, I'll defer to you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was the conclusion of the conversation, though, like that we should vote at some point soon over, because it feels like there's two paths. One is interpret the current charter as requiring TAC approval of all either project proposals or all technical initiatives, even at the working group level, or to delegate it out. I feel like there's issues such as the OpenVex submission where this is kind of a topic that needs some resolution, and if you want us staff to try to enforce some of the process and blow whistles when we see things approved at the working group levels without being elevated to the TAC, we need some clarity too. So do you want to have that vote next time in 2 weeks, or did we have enough consensus here to feel like it's ready for a vote? Or
I don't think we have a proposal to discuss yet. I mean, I guess what I took back from a lot of that was a good set of introspective or retrospective around where we are today, things that might need some tweaks, might need some clarification. So really was aiming just to try to catalyze those and get them documented so that we could pick up that work going forward. But I don't think we have necessarily something that we need to imminently call for a vote on, unless other TAC members disagree with that.
+1 from me to your comment, Bob.
Okay, great.
So I think listing off a couple things, and again, not trying to be my memory, going off of memory here, so apologies if I forget something. I heard a comment around clarifying the process for requesting resources from projects or working groups, making sure that we have that clearly documented on the website or on the GitHub repo, rather. 2, a clarification around whether the current process applies to top level projects reporting to the TAC, or what authority is delegated to the working group. That seemed to be another discussion to be had. I think, Crow, to your point around, there's also a comment around ensuring that we do have TAC representation at working groups. Today, I think we do. That isn't necessarily a given post-election, right? So making sure that we're clear around that as a responsibility of TAC members to ultimately help to guide and steer working groups. I know we're all busy people, and some of us make meetings more often than not. I'm sitting in the camp of not making meetings as often as I'd like, but in the interest of, again, trying to make sure that we have accurate representation and context, being clear with the new TAC members coming in, I think it's a good point for us to discuss. What else am I missing? Again, I'm not trying to be comprehensive here or omit anything, just trying to go off of memory.
Better documentation on what triggers escalation. If somebody's asking for simple collaboration, or if they're actually asking for things like money.
And what's the policy on decision making?
Can you clarify a little bit more on what you mean by that, Arno?
What kind of, how do we make decisions? Is it majority vote, consensus, meaning like, no sustained objection, that kind of stuff? At least it should be, one possibility is we don't define it, but we say each group needs to define it as part of the charter, or, but this should be documented somewhere. And we could have one by default, at least, that we define.
Quick response, and then I'll go to Jeff. My understanding is that the tax process is actually documented in the charter, which is call for a majority vote to carry things. It's not a consensus view. Jeff, go ahead.
Well, and I was just going to lobby for consistency, to not leave it up to the individual working groups, but to provide some general overall guidance, because that way it gives the community a better sense that, oh, this is how we work together. And that way we can fly in formation and you don't have a lot of variety in how that happens. Again, not to set up huge barriers or hurdles, but to simply have consistency and open governance.
Each working group should have initially started with the template that was passed down from the TAC in days of yore. And there is a membership and voting process listed in that template. To our nose point, it is a bit fuzzy. It starts off saying we try to work with consensus, but then there is words around majority vote. So I think it would be very helpful to have that master template updated to better clarify like the membership ladder, what are kind of eligibility criteria, and then specifically how the votes are conducted and recorded. I think that would be very useful. And then get that filtered out again to each of the groups.
Zach.
This might already be implied, but one of the action items I think should be bringing the existing TAC issue on updating the documentation project creation process to its conclusion. And then we were also discussing if it should include like a sandbox concept in it as well.
And then there is a sandbox, but there is for things that don't necessarily meet that bar. How do outside pieces of work get brought in that are looking for just collaboration?
Got it. And again, thank you to anonymous koala, whoever that is taking furious notes during the conversation. Certainly appreciate that. All right, we have 2 minutes remaining. So any other final topics? Jeff, go ahead. Or koala is Jacques. So thank you, Jacques. Appreciate that. Crow, go ahead.
Several of us have been working in collaboration with a few different industry groups. I put a note at the top of the TAC agenda. We are looking at starting a W3C workshop called Secure the Web Forward. It's focused on helping talk with web developers and having them improve their security and secure supply chain practices. So there is a call for papers, and I would love to get elements of this community looped in to potentially submit papers for that workshop to discuss and improve the security of the webs.
Thanks, Fred. And Jeff.
With only a minute left and another collective hour of our valuable lives just spent on this TAC, I wanted to take a moment at the end here to thank and congratulate the TAC Fearless Leader for the last 12 months. Bob has done a yeoman's job of helping to evolve the TAC from the 0.0 to the 1.0 phase successfully. And I just wanted to say heartfelt thanks and nice work. Thank you.
No, thank you, Jeff. And like all good efforts, can't do it alone. So certainly thanks to many of my fellow TAC members, as well as many of the contributors that have helped to steer us through the last year. I think it's been an interesting sequence of times in the world, much less within the foundation. But I think we all have a positive intent. We all have a desire to leave the world and the ecosystem a better place than how we found it. And I think that makes the work worthwhile and gives it its meaning and purpose. So thanks all to your help. All right, with that, we will close today's meeting. Again, a call for you. If you have not had a chance to vote, please do vote. That makes sure that we have, again, community representation going forward, which is critical to all of this. And thanks again for the dialogue today. Appreciate it.